Well, here's a very good morning to you. Today we're going to be talking about making wholemeal homemade bread. It's actually going to be about 80% wholemeal, 20% regular white flour, just to give it a bit of pleasant texture. And yes, it's a simple loaf that I cook quite often, and I thought it might be interesting to just run through it with you on the video machine. So here are the tools and bits and pieces that you'll need. I use a stand mixer with a standard dough hook because it saves me kneading bread for hours and hours. You'll also need a stainless steel bowl, or indeed a ceramic bowl, which you should oil lightly. You'll need some white flour, some strong bread flour, or wholemeal bread flour, some yeast. I use Allison's dried active yeast, and about 300 ml of warm water with a teaspoon or two of sugar dissolved in it. So stir your lukewarm water quite thoroughly to ensure that the sugar is fully dissolved, and once you've achieved that, you can add the dried yeast. Now, I've messed around with this for a little while, and my preference is to add 2 generous teaspoons of dried active yeast to the warm water, and then just let it stand to activate for about maybe 10 minutes. Surprisingly difficult to do that one-handed, but there you go. Now I'll give that a stir and put it to one side while I turn my attention to the flour. One of these little doohickeys, I've no idea what the proper name for it, is quite useful in giving your yeast and warm water mix a thorough stir, as you will about to see. And once the yeast is nicely distributed and mixed, you can let that stand for a little while it starts to activate. I'm not particularly precious about the type of flour I use, although I have had good results with Matthew's Cotswold flour, both their wholemeal and their white. And of course, be sure to use strong bread flour rather than regular flour. Then simply weigh out. This is going to be a 500 gram loaf, or 500 grams of flour, so I'll use about 400 grams of wholemeal and about 100 grams of white. That will do nicely, no need to be too accurate about this. I'm now going to add a very generous pinch of salt to the mixture of the 2 flours and stir them together well using a wooden spoon. And when I say generous, I do mean really quite generous. So I'll just sprinkle that in. And then I'll give it a good mix so that the flour and salt are nicely combined. And then we can move on to adding the liquids. That will do, no need to be too precise about this. So the first thing I add is a generous slug of whatever extra virgin olive oil I've got to hand that's not too expensive, so thank you Mr. Tesco's. and that should do for that. And now I'll add the yeast and sugar water. You'll see the yeast has frothed and foamed up quite nicely, which shows it's good and active. And I've got about 300 millilitres of water mixed with yeast in this jug, and I'll use most of it because I'm in the habit of adjusting the mix of the flour once it's in the mixer. Give it a swirl to make sure you get all the yeast in, and away we go. So now I just give it an initial mix with the wooden spoon, just to get the flour started off. Again, no need to be fancy or precious about this, just give it a mix so that the dough hook has got something to work with, and then stick it on the stand mixer. Here we are on the stand mixer, and I like to mix it for about 4 or 5 minutes at a reasonably enthusiastic pace. While the mixer's running, I've just added a small splash of olive oil into the bowl I'm going to be using for the bread dough, and I'm going to show you the state of the dough in the mixer now. What I want is for the bread mix to come away cleanly, and as you can see at the moment it's sticking on the bottom, which means it's a little bit wet. So I'm going to add a bit of extra flour, just a small amount, until we get a nice clean consistency that rolls cleanly around the bowl. And you can see, even with just a small addition of flour, that's now beginning to form a nice round ball that's kind of cleaning the bowl as it goes. And that's exactly what we want. So I'll let that run for a couple more minutes to ensure it's all nicely mixed together and nicely kneaded. And then we'll pop it into our bowl. And I'm just going to wipe that little bit of oil that's in the bowl around the inside of the bowl to stop the dough mix from sticking. Okay, I'm quite happy with how that's looking. I'll just lift up the lid, and you can see that the dough is holding its shape quite nicely, a little bit sticky, a little bit stretchy, but that's exactly what we want. What I'll now do is transfer that into the stainless steel bowl that is already oiled, and then cover it with a damp tea cloth and leave it to rise for about an hour and 30 minutes. So here's the bread in the bowl, looking a little bit rough and ready, so what I'll do is I'll just give that a swirl round in the bowl to get into a nice even shape. And that would do quite nicely. So now all that remains is to cover it with a damp tea towel and let it rise for about 90 minutes. So the next phase of the process is to shape the bread and knock it back, as they call it. And what I do here is, just to make things a bit easier further down the line, is I lay out a sheet of baking paper, baking parchment, and then if I can find my flour, I sprinkle the baking parchment reasonably generously with flour, and then turn the risen dough, praise be, he is risen, onto that, and then just work it not too energetically, stretching it as you move it. I hope you're able to see this. I've got the camera in the right position. Anything is possible. Just a few times, don't need to go crazy with any of this. And as you're working it, and it's very light, very easy, no real effort required in this. Just gradually form it into the shape of loaf that you're looking for. And as you do that, you can hopefully see that I'm just sort of stretching it under itself as I slowly turn it round. And this is quite a quick process, takes not very long at all. And then when it's done, just position it nicely, cover it again with a tea towel, and yes, leave it for another hour. Time, forever a cruel mistress, has passed, and the oven is now heating up to 220 degrees centigrade on fan setting. Yes, I know it's quite hot. What we need. And the bread too is turning out quite nicely. So we now move on to the very final stage before plunging it into the furnace that is the oven. First, take some flour, I generally use white, and just dust the loaf with a little flour. Then gently, very gently, just pass that over the surface without knocking any air out, if you can. Then take a knife. I tend to use a serrated bread knife because I find it works better, and cut some deep cuts into the surface of the bread. This is the bit that I generally don't do very well, but there we are. There are worse problems to have. And then stick it in the oven. That's why I use a sheet of baking paper. You won't be able to see this because I need both hands, what I'll show you in a second. And there we go, there's the beauty on her baking sheet, ready to be plunged into the heat. Plunge away. And that will stay in the oven for 45 minutes. And so we arrive at the moment of truth. Oh, that looks very acceptable indeed. 1 second while I put it on the rack to cool. And so to the final stage. The bread is out of the oven. It's got a nice dark crust on it, and it's on a rack to cool for about 20 to 30 minutes. I hope you enjoyed the video.